This man disguised himself as a sanitation worker and patiently staked out the white powder dealer's house for 3 whole days, finally discovering what he was looking for, the ingredient for the white powder. It seems they've been working non-stop recently. The empty bottles and the electronic scale were undeniable evidence confirming that the place the man was staking out was the den of the white powder dealers. Not long after 3 figures wearing terrifying masks silently appeared in front of the house. The white powder dealer, sitting on the sofa, didn't have time to react before he was pinned down by these 3 large men. The other man was sound asleep, only realizing with horror that their house had been broken into when the cold gun barrel touched his cheek. The masked leader repeatedly interrogated them about where the money was hidden. The white powder dealer tried to play dumb, but the next second the gun barrel was shoved straight into his mouth. He was forced to honestly reveal the money's location. Sure enough, another robber found the money hidden in the toilet bowl. Having achieved their goal, the 3 quickly bolted without a second glance. The mastermind behind this robbery was Big Beard Robbie. His plan was extremely clever because the white powder dealers were doing illegal things, so they wouldn't dare report the robbery to the police. Moreover, even if they did report it, who would suspect a sanitation worker who rummages through trash cans? This was truly a flawless, perfect criminal plan. However, what they didn't know was that this case had caught the attention of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. The story needs to be told from the beginning. Big Beard Robbie belonged to the lowest class of society. A year ago, his wife left home, leaving him and his 2 children to rely on each other. To escape poverty, he risked choosing a criminal path specializing in robbing those who wouldn't dare report to the police. His best friend Mike was his most reliable partner. The 2 had planned and successfully executed many robberies together. This time, they targeted the white powder dealers and identified their identities through the items they rummaged through in the trash bags out front. Now they were just waiting for the right moment to strike. Afterward, the 2 drove to a small forest to rest. Mike suddenly asked Robbie if he could own an island of his own who would help him pick up the trash there. Robbie immediately burst out laughing at his friend's playful jab. He joked that he'd buy the place outright, and then he wouldn't have to worry about picking up trash anymore. Once he lived on the island, he'd never have to bother about garbage, only deciding where to hang his hammock. Next, Robbie asked his friend if he was dating any girls online to live a decent life. Mike shook his head, saying he was perfectly fine living alone, but Robbie expressed that he was ready. He wanted to find a partner to start his life over. His wife had been gone for a whole year, and the longer the time stretched, the less Robbie believed she would return. Mike looked at Robbie, a hint of surprise flashing in his eyes, but he actually understood his friend well. So he suggested Robbie could try dating websites. Who knows, he might actually find his soulmate. Meanwhile, FBI agent Tom was experiencing a boring, dull office life. He didn't have any important assignments and was practically idle all day. When he finally got to go on an external assignment, he was only standing at a job fair to recruit people. Tom was so bored that he ended up ordering a pair of binoculars online to observe the people in the hall. Suddenly, a dark face appeared in the lens, giving Tom a fright. Tom forced a smile and hastily introduced the advantages of working for the FBI to the young black man. The young man asked, "Is this the official position at the FBI?" Tom smiled and said that he was actually an off-duty agent currently on leave and would soon have to return to chasing criminals. The young man laughed, saying the criminals should watch out. Tom was speechless for a moment. At this point, the young black man smiled and left the booth. In another development, Robbie and Mike drove to find their helper, Ethan. As soon as Ethan saw his 2 friends, he boasted that he had found his soulmate. Although Robbie and Mike teased him, they were genuinely happy for Ethan. After a few minutes of small talk, the 3 got down to business. After several weeks of surveillance, Robbie felt tonight was the right time to strike. Robbie said, "I think we can go tonight." Ethan happily agreed and planned to use the money from the job to hold a wedding for his girlfriend. Afterward, Robbie and Mike drove back to the cabin in the woods. Since Robbie's brother died, he had brought his 2 children to live here. Thanks to his niece helping look after the kids, Robbie could confidently carry out his plan. After dinner, Robbie read a bedtime story to the 2 children. Robbie waited until both were asleep before going to find his niece Maeve, lying that he and his friend were going to the bar for a bit and asking her to watch the children. Maeve believed him and even warned the 2 not to bring back any driving under the influence tickets. The 3, led by Robbie, then drove straight to the white powder dealer's house. What followed was the scene that took place at the beginning of the story. After successfully robbing the illegal money from the white powder dealers, the 3 quickly withdrew from the scene. Elsewhere, Tom went to meet with his lawyer. For various reasons, his eldest son had committed murder, and was currently facing trial. That was why Tom always looked so worn out. The lawyer said the potential penalty was 5 to 15 years in prison, and the specific sentence would depend on the family's character statements for mitigation. Tom no longer had any intention of arguing. The lawyer then told him he should seek his daughter's opinion. Tom was silent for a moment, then nodded softly. Late at night, Tom went to the ice cream shop where his daughter worked part-time. He took the opportunity while buying a smoothie to call his daughter outside to talk. Tom asked his daughter if she had thoroughly considered writing a character statement for her brother's mitigation. His daughter looked troubled. She said she needed more time to think and then turned and ran back into the shop. Tom could do nothing but watch. However, early the next morning, Tom suddenly received an urgent text message from his supervisor asking him to come to her office. When Tom arrived at the office, his supervisor, with a heavy expression, told Tom that he needed to return to his field assignment. He was surprised by the order from his superior, as it was clearly not an appropriate time for him to be working. Catherine clearly knew about his family situation, but she had no other choice either. Faced with his superior's firm attitude, Tom could only accept because a series of house robberies had occurred in Monroe County and Delaware County. Therefore, the special agent in charge requested his superior to organize a task force specifically to investigate this matter. Intelligence indicated that this robbery gang sometimes consisted of 2 people, sometimes 3, and their targets were white powder dealing operations. Sources from the Anti-White Powder Agency reported that at least 9 Hawaiian homes in this area have recently been robbed, 7 of which were operated by the Dark Heart motorcycle gang. This gang is not easy to deal with. They think this is due to other gangs fighting for territory, so 2 days ago they murdered 2 people to assert their dominance. To prevent the gang war from escalating further, Tom's superior ordered him to form an action team to find the true identities of these 3 robbers. The team members were State Trooper Elizabeth Sergeant Alia and Detective Anthony. It was clear that his superior had not provided Tom with top talent. Furthermore, due to tight budgets, the Bureau even assigned the task force to a safe house that was both secluded and dilapidated. Tom rushed over and saw the place looked like a haunted house that had been abandoned for years. Having no other choice, Tom could only clean up this messy site first before gathering his team members. On the other side, Robbie and his accomplices, having just made a large sum of money, were fully enjoying their fun in the woods. They were chasing each other, goofing around, and sunbathing by the river, having a great time. Just then, Robbie received a message from his informant that a new robbery target had appeared. They needed to go to the target location to scout and assess the situation. However, Mike kept feeling that the eyes of the person standing in front of the target house looked very strange, but Robbie didn't worry about it at all, suggesting Mike was overthinking things. After returning home, Robbie began searching for information about a partner on the internet. He then listened to music while going to his niece's room, intending to look for old photos of his brother to reminisce. But suddenly footsteps echoed from outside. Robbie thought his niece was back, and feeling awkward could only quickly hide behind the curtain nearby. However, his niece brought a man home. Robbie didn't want to witness his niece's intimate moment, so he had to apologize as he stepped out from behind the curtain. Consequently, the young man was so agitated that he even tried to strike Robbie. Robbie had no choice but to grab him and drag him out of the house. Although the outsider had been driven away, his niece, Maeve, was furious. Robbie quickly apologized to her, but Maeve was very sharp. Robbie said the man was about to strike him right in his own house, but Maeve immediately retorted that this was her house, not his. Maeve's words were not wrong. After her father passed away, this house naturally belonged to her. After Robbie lost his home, it was Maeve who allowed him to move in. However, the result was only bringing trouble upon herself. Barely 20 years old, she had to bear the responsibility of taking care of 2 children. This should have been Robbie's responsibility, but now he was living a carefree, independent life, and this made Maeve increasingly resentful. Hearing this, Robbie was deeply hurt and immediately became angry, proclaiming this was his brother's house and telling Maeve to leave quickly, stating he could take good care of the children himself. Maeve replied that if she truly believed those ridiculous words for even half a second, she would have left a long time ago. After speaking, Maeve angrily walked into the house, but the next second she saw her little cousin timidly begging her not to go. In the end, Maeve couldn't abandon the children. As for the unlucky Tom, he finally managed to clean the safe house to an acceptable state. He then quickly called the team members to the location. As Tom was unwrapping the coffee machine, he heard loud swearing outside. He walked to the door and saw it was Elizabeth on the phone cursing out her ex-husband. Tom pretended not to notice and quietly stepped away. As Tom was organizing his desk in the office, Alea walked in speaking politely and unhurriedly, which finally brought Tom some relief. However, as soon as Alea sat down, she pulled out wipes and began cleaning continuously. It turned out she was a person with severe obsessive-compulsive cleaning disorder. The last person to arrive was Anthony. As soon as he walked in the door, he started complaining that he'd heard the FBI was cheap, but he never expected the house they found to be even worse than a haunted house. Tom looked at the 3 team members, each indeed having their own quirks. After waiting for over 10 more minutes, Elizabeth finally entered the meeting room after finishing her argument. Just as Tom was about to introduce the mission, he noticed Elizabeth whispering to Anthony. Upon asking, he found out Elizabeth was complaining that the house had an unpleasant moldy smell, being both damp and stinky. It was just that everyone was being polite and didn't feel comfortable saying it outright. Tom was already furious inside, but looking at his 3 quirky subordinates, no matter how great his anger was, he had to suppress it. That day's meeting had to end hastily. That evening, Tom met up with a friend to drink and vent. He drank until he was plastered and was then escorted home. In another scene, Robbie and his accomplices took action in the rainy night. The 3 men in masks crept into the new target's house. The bald-headed white powder dealer was just entering the bathroom when he was suddenly confronted by a chilling figure wearing a skull mask. However, being a member of a motorcycle gang, this bald man showed no fear at all, staring directly at the opponent and asking who he was. His girlfriend was even more daring, struggling and clawing wildly, and directly yanked off one of the robber's masks. At this moment, everything descended into total chaos. Robbie's accomplice rushed forward to restrain the bald man's girlfriend, but was bitten severely by her. The bald man's girlfriend cursed and screamed that she would tear the opponent apart. She ran next to the bald man, yelling loudly that she had clearly seen the robber's face. Robbie Apu had no choice but to pull out his gun and point it at the bald man's mouth, forcing him to reveal where the money was hidden. Unexpectedly, the bald man was extremely tough and directly challenged him to shoot if he dared. The robbers were forced to search the house themselves. They tore through the messy house, but the terrible thing was that they completely failed to notice that the ties on the bald man's hands were not tightly secured. While they were searching, there was a sudden knock at the door. Robbie quickly used duct tape to seal the bald man's mouth. The bald man's friend, upon entering the door, sensed something was wrong and immediately drew his gun and went straight up the stairs. Robbie's accomplice tried to ambush him, but was exposed by his shadow. As the men tried to flee, they realized there was no escape from the second floor. Worse, the bald man and his girlfriend took this opportunity to escape their bonds. Just then, the room door was violently kicked open. Several gunshots rang out. Afterward, the bald man's 3 associates fell into a pool of blood, and Robbie also permanently lost one of his teammates. Robbie sat stunned next to the body, still reeling when he was reminded that the commotion was too loud and likely alerted the neighbors. He picked up the stolen bag and prepared to leave. Suddenly, a small boy crawled out from the corner of the room and innocently asked if he was his dad's friend. Robbie and Mike exchanged glances. If they left the child behind, they could be exposed at any moment. But if they took the child, how should they handle him? On the other side, Tom, who was sound asleep, was suddenly awakened by the ringing phone. Who would have thought that on his first day as the action team leader, he would encounter a quadruple murder? Tom put an ice pack on his face, pulled himself together, and rushed to the scene. At this point, the other team members had arrived. Elizabeth told Tom that there should have been a child in this house. A neighbor said that when the boy didn't behave, he was usually locked in the basement. But currently there were still pillows and blankets at the scene, but the child had vanished without a trace. It was unknown whether he had been murdered or taken by the robbers. The scene shifts. It turns out the child was with Robbie. He had brought the child back to his house. At this point, things were becoming increasingly complicated. At the same time, Jason was sound asleep when he was awakened by an urgent phone call. Very quickly, the news Jason heard dispelled all his drowsiness. 3 gang members had been murdered last night, and a very important shipment had also been stolen. Elsewhere, Tom was still investigating the scene, and the search lasted until morning. The result was that there was no sign of the child anywhere nearby. Tom decided to change the direction of the investigation. He told Elizabeth and Alea to drive around the area to see if residential security cameras had captured anything, and he called Anthony to join him to speak with the fiancé of the victim, Ethan. After each of them finished their tasks, they were to return to the safe house to regroup. The view shifts to Robbie. He and Mike were hiding in his niece's house. The informant hadn't given Robbie new instructions, and there shouldn't have been a child in that house. This was the first time Mike had killed anyone, and he had indirectly caused the death of a best friend and brought back a child who had seen both their faces, so he was broken and emotionally distraught. Seeing this, Robbie quickly comforted him, telling Mike to trust him and assuring him that he would definitely find a solution. After Robbie's comforting words, Mike's emotions gradually calmed down. Then the two examined the loot from the previous night. It turned out the bag did not contain cash, but instead contained unsold fentanyl. The product hadn't even been unwrapped, indicating it had just been transported across the border and was robbed before it could be sold. If it was genuine, its value was much higher than a bag of cash. Robbie immediately texted his informant saying they had taken the wrong bag and asking the person to call him back as soon as possible. Afterward, Robbie prepared breakfast for the kidnapped boy. The child hadn't seen his parents murdered, so he didn't think Robbie was a bad person at all. The boy was easily coaxed by Robbie. Robbie conveniently fabricated a story that the boy's parents had gone to care for his sick grandmother, and he was the uncle they had asked to look after the child. The boy asked how he knew his parents. Robbie replied that he knew them through his brother, who used to work with the boy's father, and this was long before the boy was born. Only then did the child believe him. Meanwhile, Jason called his associates to discuss how the opponent knew the location of the newly arrived shipment. Who exactly revealed the secret? Jason understood that the situation was not simple, so he decided to call an emergency meeting for the entire gang. On the other side, Tom and Anthony arrived at Ethan's fiance's house to investigate. Tom told Ethan's fiancée that Ethan had died at the scene of the robbery and was one of the robbers who committed the crime. Furthermore, this was not the first time Ethan had been involved in similar activities. Currently, a child is missing from the victim's house, so the police need to know who Ethan was with last night. However, the girl and Ethan had only met online a few weeks ago, so they didn't know each other deeply at all. She had also never met any of Ethan's other friends. Tom wanted to ask something more, but the girl's emotions suddenly spiraled out of control and she refused to cooperate further with the investigation. Tom and his colleague had no choice but to hastily conclude the interrogation. On the way back, Anthony curiously asked Tom how long he had been working for the FBI. Tom's answer was quite surprising. He officially joined in 2003, but before that he had assisted the FBI for many years as a chaplain because the FBI often sent religious personnel to fly along when dealing with large-scale casualty incidents. Anthony looked a bit astonished, wondering how a chaplain became an FBI agent. Tom honestly replied that during his work, he got to know his current superior, and it was his superior who helped arrange for Tom to go to Quantico. Anthony looked doubtful, not understanding why the FBI would use a chaplain in large-scale casualty cases. Was it to sprinkle holy water or offer advice? In another development, Tom's youngest daughter went to a friend's house and mentioned that her father had been constantly drinking to drown his sorrows lately because of her brother's situation. The entire family was now in a difficult situation because the person murdered by her brother was the girl's mother and Tom's wife of many years. That was why everyone had such an attitude towards the character statement for mitigation. The youngest daughter knew that if she did nothing, it would be equivalent to abandoning her brother. Her brother's condition would not improve in prison because even with therapy, a psychiatrist, and regular medication at home, her brother still struggled to control himself. But honestly, perhaps going to jail would be the better solution. Speaking for herself, what she actually feared more was her brother being released early, and that would mean the nightmare would begin again. At the same time, Tom was still busy with the case. At the meeting, everyone discussed the latest clues. Alia's investigation revealed that the victims were not model parents. They frequently neglected their children due to white powder addiction. The child was initially taken away by authorities, but because the child's grandmother suffered from senile dementia and was placed in a nursing home, coupled with the parents passing a series of white powder tests, the Youth Services Center returned the child to them. However, the robbers only targeted the Dark Heart gang, so finding them would lead to the child. Anthony, meanwhile, investigated the Dark Heart gang's profile. The leader was a man named Jason, the Delaware County chapter president, personally chosen by Old Man Perry. Perry was one of the 12 national leaders who founded the Mothers Council, and their job was to oversee all gang activities. Rumor has it that after Perry took Jason under his wing, Perry himself dealt with the previous Delaware County chapter president to put Jason in that position. Under Jason's leadership, the Dark Heart gang grew stronger, started dealing fentanyl, and has now developed into the second largest white powder trafficking organization in the Northeast. Unlike other erratic motorcycle gangs, Dark Heart is a very tight and disciplined organization. The exposure of several of their white powder stashes clearly indicated an internal mole in the gang had provided information to the robbers, and the identity of this mole was likely a core member. But if the police knew Darkheart had a mole, they certainly knew too, and should have a way to drag the mole into the light. Elsewhere, Perry and Jason met in the woods. The organization had realized there was a mole, but the whole city was currently scrambling to find the child because no one wanted to invite trouble. The Mother's Council was currently doubting Jason's leadership ability, which is why Perry was sent to clean up the mess. Jason asked Perry for a few more days, assuring him he could definitely solve the problem. Perry said those men splattered their brother's blood and brains all over the wall, and they took one of their people, and it's a child. Perry emphasized that it was a child, and Jason still dared to ask for more time. Jason hastily told Perry that those guys stole not money, but product. They will surely have to find a place to sell that product, and there is only one buyer in this area. With the help of this buyer, they can catch the robbers. In addition, Jason also received news that the FBI had formed a task force, but its leader was just an inexperienced off-duty agent, so there was no need to worry. However, Tom had already sought out a colleague knowledgeable about motorcycle gangs to get an update on the situation. He learned that in November last year, this colleague had arrested a small-time dealer in the Darkheart gang's distribution chain. After reaching an agreement, this person pleaded guilty and confessed to a violation of the gang's internal rules. Jason used the excuse of hosting a party to invite a gang member to the cabin in the woods, but the result was that as soon as the man arrived, he was beaten for hours by Jason and finally died tragically in that house. In reality, this man was Maeve's father. When the police investigated at the time, Maeve had firmly insisted that Jason was the killer, but due to lack of evidence, the case was eventually dropped. The view shifts to Robbie. He had just received a text message to meet his informant, and immediately after he heard his niece returning. He hurriedly told the boy to hide, but the child was still discovered by Maeve. Robbie had to lie to Maeve that a friend of his was in trouble and needed him to look after his son for a few days. Although Maeve was not happy, she didn't ask any further questions. However, that evening, after taking a bath, the boy casually revealed that his father was Jason. Maeve was instantly stunned and took out her phone to check. Sure enough, the boy was the son of the enemy who murdered her father. Currently, the entire city was looking for this boy. Elsewhere, Perry and Jason met at a bar. Perry had made arrangements with the buyer, but so far, no one had contacted the buyer to sell the product. Perry asked Jason, who on his side knew that the shipment hadn't been sold last night. Jason replied that there were only 2 people. Perry then told Jason not to tip off the enemy and wait for them to walk into the trap. At the same time, Tom picked up his eldest daughter, who had just returned home from elsewhere. The whole family needed to carefully discuss whether or not to write the character statement for mitigation. The lawyer was also present at the scene. He told everyone that if they didn't fight for him, their son would be sentenced to 15 years in prison. But as soon as the youngest daughter expressed agreement, she was fiercely opposed by the eldest daughter. It turned out that the son in prison and the youngest daughter were the adoptive siblings that Tom and his wife had taken in. In the eldest daughter's view, her mother had worked hard to raise them only to be pushed off the stairs and killed by the adoptive son, who suffered from an uncontrollable mental illness. Therefore, the eldest daughter could not accept that the price the perpetrator had to pay for murder was a mere 5 years. She quietly asked her honest father what he would think if Ethan walked out of those doors 5 years later. After Ethan had killed his wife and mother, would Ethan still be able to move into the upstairs bedroom to live? Tom did not know how to answer. He missed his wife every day. As a chaplain, he always advised people to be forgiving, but when the event happened to him, he didn't know what the right thing to do was. In the end, this conversation also ended in discord. Elsewhere, Robbie and Mike went to the agreed-upon bar, but the informant never showed up. Robbie then received a message canceling the meeting. The other party seemed to have encountered some kind of trouble. While her uncle was absent, Maeve took the boy to a supermarket and left him there. She then went to her workplace, took a phone from the lost and found box, and called the police hotline, lying that she had seen the missing child. The police quickly rushed to the supermarket, but Maeve didn't realize that the boy had quietly crept back into the car without a sound. At this point, the entire area was sealed off by the police, making things incredibly difficult to resolve. This concludes the entire content of the first 2 episodes of the series Task 2025. This series is not a thrilling action drama like The Terminal List or Black Wolf, but rather more of a drama. The director uses subtle techniques to focus the lens on two failed men crushed by life. The director's brilliance lies in not separating the fates of these two failed men, but allowing them to mirror each other within an invisible narrative web. Although the storytelling pace of the first two episodes is slow, every minute is building up conflict for the subsequent developments. The lives of these two failed men are destined to intersect in this spiral of crime and punishment. All right, that's it for today's video. Thank you all for watching. Your likes, comments, and follows are the greatest encouragement for us. See you in the next installment.